Leaving or staying? Two choices in life. Over the years as a school chaplain, I've attended dozens and dozens of retirement speeches about teachers who were leaving teaching and moving into retirement. There's always been a good mix of one-liners, like, when some people retire, it's going to be mighty hard to tell the difference. Or the downside about retirement is having to drink coffee in your own time. But one of my favourite stories about retirement is a parish priest from the Roman Catholic background. This priest, Father Jenkins, who was leaving his parish after 25 years of service. And a leading politician who was also a member of the congregation was chosen to make the presentation and to give a little speech at the farewell dinner to Father Jenkins. But unfortunately, the politician was delayed. So the priest decided he'd say a few words to fill in time while they waited for the politician to arrive. The priest said, "Well, I got my first impression of the parish from the first confession I heard. I thought after it that I'd been assigned to a terrible parish. The first person who entered the confessional told me he'd stolen a TV set, and when stopped by the police, he beat up the officer. He had stolen money from his parents, embezzled money from his place of work, had an affair with his boss's wife, and taken illegal drugs. I was appalled," the priest said. "But as the days went on, I knew that the people in the parish were not like that, as most of them were genuine, hard-working people." And just as the priest had finished his brief words, the politician arrived, full of apologies of being late. He immediately made the presentation to the parish priest and started to give his speech. "I'll never forget the day Father Jenkins arrived at our parish. In fact, I had the honour of being the first one in confession." So, our focus on the concept of leaving or staying. Life, of course, is full of moments of leaving or staying. For many of us, the moments of leaving come from leaving home for a holiday or moving to a new suburb, town or city. For some, it's leaving home and family to live in a new country. And for many young people, it is the obligatory overseas trip, leaving home to explore the world before returning to enter university or commencing a job. I always remember the feelings and the event that I experienced of leaving my parents' family and my cousins, standing on the platform of Maidenhead railway station in England one cold autumn morning in October 1950, as we said goodbye and caught the train that would take us to Tilbury Dock in London to embark on our journey to Australia. It partly explains why to this day I don't like saying goodbyes. And of course, some leave a relationship or a marriage after years of struggling with the frustration and the disappointment of an unsatisfactory relationship. And for some parents, the thought of their adult children leaving home becomes a very appealing idea. In Australia, the average age when young people leave the parental home is 28 years. So if you've got an 18-year-old at home, you've got 10 years to go, folks. Many stay, of course, because of economic reasons, so they can save for a house deposit or travel. And there are appropriate times for us to leave places or circumstances in life. There is a time when young people need to leave home so that they can grow up and become an independent person. For young people, there comes a time when they need to leave the protective environment of a school and move into the wider world to test their abilities and skills. So in the reading from Genesis this morning, we encounter the story of Abram, of course, who later became Abraham. If there is one quality above all others that distinguishes the person of faith, it is the ability to leave home. It is likely that Abram was known as the father of faith for this very reason. The writer of the letter to the Hebrews in the New Testament tells us, by faith Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to a place which he was to receive as an inheritance, and he went out not knowing where he was to go. So Abram went. As the misty figure of Abraham meets us from out of the past in that story, it is simply his leaving and not staying that strikes us as extraordinary. To set out into the unknown, to leave the familiar for the unfamiliar, is difficult enough in our day of rootless mobility. But to go from your father's house in the time of Abraham can only have met an act of huge courage and ultimate freedom. Abraham went into the unknown when he set out from Ur of the Chaldees, and all he had for security were a few vague promises concerning the prosperity for his descendants. He did it again when he went down to Egypt, and again when he set off into the wilderness of Moriah to sacrifice his son Isaac. And the Hebrew scriptures tell us little of Abraham seeking after assurances to make the way more familiar and bearable, as did Moses and David and Solomon and the prophets. From the story of Abraham, we can glean that he was that rare sort of person who can face the unknown without something to prop him up. A person who has the kind of freedom to take things as they come without fearing the unexpected. With Abraham, it is no longer necessary to speak of faith in terms of a basic sense of security, a feeling of being accepted, trust, and all the rest. All this is presumed. It comes together in the one remarkable ability to leave home. So a question: what is home for you? What is home emotionally for you? What is home socially? And what is home for you spiritually or religiously? And the choice: do we leave or do we stay? And I want to use that story as a springboard into two contemporary situations which are in the news quite often at the moment, situations of which I am sure we are all aware. Firstly, the impact on relationships of going or staying. Many years ago, when I was a volunteer counsellor at Southways Counselling Service in Cheltenham, I had a client who was married to a very unpleasant man for 40 years. Her mother died when she was 8 years old, and she had to cook and look after her father and her younger brothers. She was married at 17, and she married a man who was abusive, a bully, totally controlling, and virtually treated her as his slave. She finally plucked up the courage when she was 60 years of age to leave him and to try and find a more satisfying life for herself. But as you can imagine, it was not easy for her. According to the Domestic Violence Prevention Centre, most women will, on average, if they live in an abusive relationship, will try to leave that relationship between 5 and 7 times before successfully and permanently being able to do so. Just think about that. 5 to 7 times. Another example, Roya Atmar now has a very fulfilling job with the Patricia Giles Centre in WA, which provides emergency accommodation and support for women and children from abusive situations. Almost 20 years ago, Roya was hospitalised for 3 months after her then husband doused her in turpentine and set her on fire. She suffered horrific injuries, as you can imagine. But it was while she was in hospital, while she was recovering, that she realised for the first time that she could leave her abuser, thanks to the vigilance of staff and the support of her family. Of course, her husband never left her alone, which is one of the ways that these kind of people control their partner. So she could never talk to friends or family about her situation. She said she had no idea that she had the option of leaving the relationship because she was married at 14 in Afghanistan and came to Australia 3 days later, and so had no family or friends here to talk to anyway. She says now that she can celebrate where she is in her life. Between 25 to 31% of murders in Australia involve either spouses or sexual partners. Instead of saying, as we do often to people in these situations, "Why don't you leave?" we should be saying, "Why does he do it?" Leaving or staying can be a life or death choice for women in an abusive relationship. Many of you here know that my wife Catherine died in October last year, and for the last 6 weeks of her life she was virtually a vegetable because of the deterioration of her brain because of the tumour and the cancer that was there. And I had to face that situation of, do we go on with this palliative care, which was very good and very caring, or could we end it quicker in some way? Well, of course, you know that legislation has been passed, I think, in Victoria about the choice that people might have towards the end of their life when they're suffering from a permanent illness, leaving or staying. The other issue of focus today, to which I'm indebted to Bishop John A.T. Robinson, who many of you have read his books, is in his book Christian Freedom in a Permissive Society. He writes about Christians in the church who no longer find the vitality, the energy and the inspiration they once experienced in the institutional church. So the question is, do I leave or do I stay? And many of people in this situation believe that the church is an essential part of the gospel, and who yet find their calling to involvement in organised religion perplexing, often to despair. And most people who are concerned for the life of the church will go on accepting positions and offices within the church, whether they're lay people or clergy. For to leave requires an ability to stand against the stream for which few have the psychological, the spiritual, or indeed the economic resources, particularly in the case of clergy, unless they have another profession to fall back on. The UCA is the third largest Christian denomination in Australia. Through its welfare agencies, it employs over 70,000 people. That's larger than BHP. It has around 2,800 congregations, 51 presbyteries and 7 synods. It has about 300,000 members throughout Australia, while 1.3 million Australians claim some kind of association with the Uniting Church. Essentially, according to Dr. Keith Suter's PhD thesis on the future of the Uniting Church, there are only 3 ways membership figures can move: up, down, or holding steady. Many of us have found a renewed life and faith as Christians in the progressive or emerging church movement. For many of you here today, you may have been inspired by your previous minister, Dr. McNabb, and his New Faith initiative that has kept you connected to this lovely church, St Michael's. Traditionally, of course, there's been a wide acknowledgement that there is a spiritual hunger in the Australian community, but usually the Christian churches have responded by asserting that there is only one way to satisfy that spiritual hunger, and that is through conventional religion. But of course, we know that the response to that is a lot wider than that today. Many people have voted with their feet, and in that way they've decided to leave rather than stay. And even if we have felt like leaving on occasions, many have stayed because this is where your friends are. This is where your community life is. And we hope against hope that something good might arrive in the life of the congregation if we can survive long enough, like waiting for a new minister. And that's not a criticism of the JNC, it just takes a long time. Can I encourage you all today, as we gather together as a congregation of St Michael's, to embrace a number of challenges as you look to the future, to engage in a study of Jesus for the 21st century, and what does it mean to follow him in the 21st century? To engage in a process as you await your new minister as to what is a relevant ministry for a city church in the 21st century. Or are we just going to do the same old stuff? And what about thinking about how the Christian faith interacts with other faith traditions? And how do we experience the divine presence and nurture our spirituality in a cosmos where we are 7 million miles from where we were last week, because we live in an expanding universe? So, may we all encourage each other to stay and to meet these challenges together.